At my spouse's funeral, our son Daniel approached the podium and, with a faltering voice, expressed gratitude to another woman. She had been the true family to us, he declared. Every gaze in the chapel shifted to the woman seated prominently in the front row, clad in a tailored dress and impeccable makeup, delicate tears poised in her eyes. And I, the actual wife, the mother, remained off to the side, unseen, a ghost in my own life. Later, when the attorney informed me my husband had bequeathed everything to her, not a single cent to me, Linda Mallister embraced my son and flashed a victorious smile as if the contest were already decided. But then I produced the second wheel, and in an instant, no one in the room was smiling any longer. I never anticipated my life would restart at a funeral. Robert perished in a sudden automobile collision. He was driving downtown during a heavy downpour. Authorities stated the brakes malfunctioned on a curve, sending the vehicle crashing into a supermarket. His death was instantaneous. The physician assured me he hadn't suffered, though I wasn't convinced he merited such a clean exit. We had been wed for 40 years. I once considered our marriage, if not passionate, at least durable, like an old house weathered by storms, worn externally but still standing. I relinquished my career to tend to every corner of our domestic life. He always insisted, "I will provide for you. You needn't work." And I trusted him. I foolishly interpreted this as a form of devotion. At the memorial, I wore his favorite charcoal gray wool coat and stood by the chapel entrance receiving guests. The wind lashed, my fingers grew numb. Still I smiled, striving to ensure his farewell was dignified and orderly. Robert cared profoundly about appearances, about others' perceptions of him. Even in death, I found myself upholding that pristine facade for his sake. Daniel stood at the lectern. He is our only child, turning 33 this year, a back-end engineer for a technology firm. He wore a sharp, dark suit, his expression solemn, his voice as measured as ever. After delivering a eulogy for his father, he paused, his eyes searching the room. "There is someone I wish to specially thank," Daniel announced, his voice trembling slightly. The assembly fell quiet. I clutched my handbag in my lap, knuckles whitening. I thought he was about to say, "my mother." In that suspended moment, I could nearly hear the words forming in his throat, that long-awaited acknowledgement. 4 decades of companionship, dedication to the home, nights spent at hospital bedsides, all the silent sacrifices. I genuinely believed he had finally seen me. But what followed cut through me like a blunt blade, stripping that hope away inch by agonizing inch. Someone who supported my father through the most difficult period of his life, Miss Linda Mallister. A soft murmur travelled through the aisle. From the front row, a woman rose and dabbed her eyes, nodding graciously. She wore a deep emerald green wool coat, black heels, flawless makeup, and perfectly coiffed hair. As she reseated herself, those nearby turned to look, curious and surprised. Sound detonated in my ears like a silence exploded. Linda Mallister. I knew the name. She was Robert's administrative assistant at the firm. He later promoted her to consulting partner, even briefly secured her a board position. Whenever I inquired about her, he would dismiss it. "She's competent. Don't be paranoid." I recalled a company gala years prior. She brought me wine, smiling sweetly, moving with the ease of a woman who belonged. I dismissed her then as merely another sycophantic employee. How ironic in retrospect. From across the room, a whisper reached me. "She's seated so close as if she's family." And my son, my own son, had just thanked that woman at his father's funeral. I felt as if the chair had vanished beneath me. A ringing filled my ears, the world vibrating faintly. People approached to shake my hand, murmuring the customary platitudes. He was a good man. We'll miss him. I nodded automatically, a machine repeating pre-programmed responses. I had intended to endure until the end to maintain appearances, but then I overheard Daniel whisper to Linda, "You're the one who's truly family." I nearly dropped the teacup in my hand. In that instant, I understood this funeral wasn't for Robert. It was for a hidden world whose existence I had never suspected, and I was merely a stranger, a discarded spectator. That evening, back in the empty house, I sat in the lifeless living room. As I removed the coat, I noticed the satin lining was wrinkled, as if the last vestige of my marital dignity had been carelessly torn. I sat at the dining table and stared at the row of vacant chairs. Robert's seat remained in its place. I hadn't moved it. For decades, he had always sat there, hand upon the armrest, waiting for me to serve his soup. Now it stood alone, the armrest cold to the touch. His favorite brand of beer still occupied the refrigerator. I never liked it. Too bitter, but he purchased a 6-pack weekly solely for himself. It turns out habit is the cruelest prison. Sleep eluded me that night. I retrieved old photo albums. In the pictures we were still young, light lived in his eyes. I smiled readily back then. I even discovered an old employee identification card from my time as a financial consultant at his firm. Short hair, self-assured, always seated second from the right at board meetings. Then he told me, "You should resign. I will handle everything." And I, fool that I was, obeyed. I closed the album and poured a glass of water. The kitchen clock ticked. I realized all the pride, all the patience I had invested in preserving our marriage had been buried the moment he died. What I did not yet comprehend was that beneath this lay a deeper treachery. The following morning, every word uttered in the attorney's office felt like a line from a life script I had never been invited to read. The air carried a faint scent of ink and aged wood cabinets. A faded print of the Constitution hung askew on the wall, and sunlight filtered through the blinds, slicing the floor into narrow strips of illumination. It was the law firm Robert had designated before his passing. The lead attorney, a man in his 50s with a ponderous, deliberate voice, drew out each syllable as if underscoring something unspoken. Pursuant to the last will and testament executed by Mr. Robert Smith 3 years ago, he began with mechanical calm. The majority of his assets, including the primary residence in Summerall, the vacation property in Nantucket, and the remaining balances of his personal accounts, shall be inherited by Ms. Linda Mallister. I was not merely stunned. I felt shoved from the main stage of my own existence, left standing behind the curtain in a dead spotlight, uncertain if I had ever truly performed the role I believed was mine. I turned to Daniel. He sat rigidly erect, his gaze fixed forward as if listening to a quarterly financial report. His fingers were interlocked perfectly. Not a flicker of surprise, not a shift in expression as if he had always known. When the reading concluded, I rose and approached him. "You knew," I stated in a low, quivering voice. "Didn't you?" He regarded me with an unnervingly serene demeanor. Dad had his reasons. His reasons? I whispered, the words catching in my throat. What did 40 years of marriage signify to him? Daniel remained silent a moment, then said, "He worked hard his entire life. Linda was there for him. She understood him." He lowered his voice almost apologetically. "You didn't." In that moment, clarity descended. Not only had I lost my husband, I was losing my son. He wasn't defending his father's memory. He was redrawing the family tree and erasing me from the map. Upon returning home, I stood in the driveway for what felt like an eternity. The weight of my handbag numbing my arm, I entered the bedroom and opened Robert's closet. His shirts, ties, and wool vests remained perfectly arranged. bearing that familiar scent of refined decorum. But what falsehoods were woven into those fibres? When had he decided I was no longer family? Was it the year I forgot to purchase his preferred wine for our anniversary? Or earlier, when I resigned my position as his financial consultant and simply became a housewife? I began rummaging through drawers for proof I wasn't insane. Old ledgers, photographs, receipts, outdated business cards. In the kitchen drawer, I discovered a folder of letters Robert had preserved. One was from the Nantucket Property Management Company. The date was 6 years prior. The recipient, Linda. My hands trembled. I had visited that seaside house countless times, never suspecting I was merely a guest. That afternoon, I crossed the street to visit Giselle, our longtime neighbour. A widow in her late 70s with a keen memory and a garden overflowing with roses. Her face stiffened when I mentioned Linda's name. Linda? Wasn't she the one Robert attended those symphony concerts with? She inquired, raising an eyebrow. You didn't accompany them? I forced a smile, my mouth dry. I never much cared for social events. Giselle shifted in her seat. Oh, I always assumed they were a couple. She's been on this street several times. One year she assisted Robert with hanging the Christmas lights. I froze. That particular Christmas, I was confined upstairs with a swollen knee. Robert had told me a neighborhood boy helped him. Do you recall when they became close? I asked. Giselle stirred her tea, contemplating. At least 10, perhaps 15 years ago. I remember seeing her around when you were away caring for your sister. I assumed she was some cousin or other. 15 years? I sat in Giselle's sunroom, feeling like a trespasser in the wrong house. All those years I had meticulously managed our retirement budget to the last penny, selected his bathrobes, scheduled his medical appointments, and even dipped into my parents' final savings to rescue his company during a liquidity crisis. And he, all the while, had been laying golden bricks for another woman's future, beyond my sight, beyond my reach. Returning home, I finally located an old cardboard box in the basement filled with photographs. There was Robert standing beside Linda at a corporate event. His hand rested gently on her arm, his smile radiant in a way I had never witnessed. He appeared relaxed, younger, happier than he ever did beside me. And in one picture was Daniel, barely 18 or 19, standing with them. His smile was nervous but not reluctant. One corner of the photo was marked over. I gently rubbed it with an eraser, uncovering a penned line. Our little family will be official one day. Something fractured deep within my chest. It wasn't my heart, it wasn't glass. It was something more profound, trust, and it would never be whole again. That night, I lit a solitary candle in the kitchen, and for the first time in that house without Robert, I played music. A slow, soft, unhurried jazz record. I began to wonder. Perhaps I had lived my entire life to his rhythm and never danced to my own. But no longer. From this point forward, the music, the beat, the dance steps, they were all mine to choose. I thought the worst had concluded. The will, the truth about the properties, Linda audaciously positioning herself as family. That seemed humiliation enough for a lifetime. Yet I hadn't realized what would truly shatter me was Daniel. He is my only child. I had believed that however unrecognizable the world became, he would remain mine. We agreed to meet at a town cafe, the very one where he used to order caramel desserts as a little boy. He arrived wearing a trench coat, his demeanor stiff and formal, as if preparing for an interview rather than meeting his mother. Before I could sit, he placed his phone face down on the table, a subtle signal that any vibration could justify abandoning the conversation. Why did you send Linda a legal notice? He demanded bluntly. I drew a deep breath and met his eyes. Do you believe I shouldn't have? He shrugged. She didn't harm you. Dad gave her the money. It was his decision. Suing her merely makes everyone uncomfortable. Uncomfortable? I echoed, my voice cracking with disbelief. Daniel, your father deceived me for decades. I surrendered my career for this family. I gave up my friends for you. I even sold my mother's emerald ring to pay your college tuition. Do you comprehend what that ring meant to me? Daniel frowned, exhaling with visible irritation. You always bring that up as if I owe you something. The remark struck me like a dull blow to the chest. It wasn't anger nor even an argument, just distance, a cold, definitive chasm. Dad told me, Daniel said after a pause, his voice dropping, that the happiest years of his life were with Linda. She understood him. She respected him. She didn't constantly question and criticize him like you did. I questioned him because he ceased respecting me, I said through gritted teeth. I criticized him because he was in the wrong. Daniel shook his head as if hearing a meaningless sermon. You're too traditional, Mum. You've always believed making sacrifices is a virtue, but Dad didn't require that kind of love. That's when I understood. This wasn't a sudden revelation for him. He had harbored these thoughts for a long while. He had merely withheld them until now. I studied him momentarily. All I could perceive was the boy he once was. The child who breathed raggedly during asthma attacks, while I kept vigil at his bedside all night. The teenager bullied at school, whose dignity I defended as if it were my own. The 17-year-old with a freshly broken heart, who curled beside me on the backyard bench in silence until the stars emerged. Did he remember any of that? I reached into my purse and extracted a faded photograph. That summer when you were 2, we went to the beach, I said, sliding the picture across the table. Your father cancelled last minute for work, so it was just us. In the photo, he wore bright red swim trunks, standing on wet sand with a trail of tiny, wobbly footprints behind him. You were terrified of the waves. You'd cling to my neck and scream, Mommy, Mommy. You didn't know much about the world then, but you knew where safety resided. Daniel looked down, saying nothing. I know you idolized your father, I continued. He was always elegantly turned out, never raised his voice, always uttered the correct words. But did you ever consider that perhaps I laid the foundation for that elegant man to exist? He glanced up, no tears, no remorse, merely a flicker of hesitation. Dad did what made him happy, he said. Linda made him feel needed. You were simply too strong. Too strong, that was my indictment. I reflected on those nights spent balancing overdue accounts, the afternoons I cooked while feverish, the years I swallowed tears at Robert's cold silences and maintained a smile regardless. That was what he meant by too strong. I returned the photo to my wallet and stood. My voice sounded calm but carried a deep firmness. You're right, I was too strong, and starting today I will reserve that strength for myself. Whatever he said thereafter, I didn't hear. I exited the cafe into the parking lot. Rain had begun to fall. Drops struck the windshield with a slow, relentless rhythm, an orchestra composed entirely of silence. I slid into the driver's seat, grasped the steering wheel, and paused for a long moment. I didn't weep. I didn't unravel. I simply sat there realizing what I had lost wasn't merely a husband. I had lost my marriage, my family, even my son. But in the same breath, I comprehended something else. I could no longer wait for someone else to define me. It was time to live for myself. Initially, I regarded Linda as a late-life accident in Robert's narrative, a calculated opportunist, a woman who slipped through the cracks. Now I saw clearly, she was never an accident. She had orchestrated everything. On a rainy afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table clutching a mug of cold coffee, examining her public Facebook profile. Her profile picture showed her on a beach, smiling softly, the background tastefully blurred as if to conceal what truly lay behind her. Her biography read, consultant in the architecture sector, lover of classical music and community service, grateful for life's tender company. I clicked on her photo albums. The first image depicted Robert seated in a wicker chair, holding a slice of lemon pie she had apparently baked for him. The caption stated, "His smile is my favorite reward." The timestamp was 6 years ago, the same year I was bedridden with arthritis. Robert had told me then that work was overwhelming and he would be travelling extensively. I believed him. I thought he was merely evading the burden of caring for an invalid. Now I knew he wasn't escaping me. He was living a separate life without me. I scrolled further, encountering more images both familiar and disquieting. There was Robert in Linda's living room, wearing the wool jacket I had gifted him. There he was assisting her with planting flowers and arranging bonsai in her garden. Then a video appeared. Robert was toasting her, a Christmas melody softly playing in the background. Daniel was present. I froze, my hand hovering over the touchpad. Daniel, then still in college with slightly longer hair and a shy, boyish face. Linda had her arm around his shoulder, laughing. "Your dad should be proud of you." That's when I comprehended. Linda was never merely Robert's secret. For years she had been positioning herself as part of our family. And I was the woman she had planned to displace. I telephoned Ruth. Ruth Lane had been a close colleague during my tenure at Robert's firm, one of the few women I maintained contact with after leaving. She was semi-retired, assisting her daughter with a grandchild and accepting occasional freelance financial cases. She answered on the second ring with her characteristic energy. "Maggie, my goodness, I heard about Robert. I've been meaning to call." "Thank you," I said, dispensing with pleasantries. "Ruth, I need your help uncovering something." She didn't hesitate. "Tell me what you suspect." I paused. My voice was calm but firm. "I believe Robert utilized company funds for at least the past decade to purchase properties for Linda, and there may be other unaccounted transfers." Ruth fell silent. "You're not merely mending a marriage, Maggie. You're aiming to expose fraud." "I want the truth," I replied. "I've dwelled in the dark too long." We arranged to meet at her home in 2 days. In the interim, I became a woman on a mission. I visited the local library and researched Linda's property records in Summerall. One house, a single-family villa under her name. Purchase date, 5 years ago, precisely at the conclusion of the company's employee housing benefits project, the same one Robert oversaw. I had visited during that project, joking at the time, "Next trip, take me along." He had evaded the suggestion. "You wouldn't enjoy it there." Now I knew the accommodation wasn't reserved for clients. It was reserved for her. 2 days later, I drove to Ruth's residence, a pale grey bungalow in a tranquil suburb with a row of withering chrysanthemums out front. She greeted me with lemon tea and opened her laptop. "I examined some archived payment records," she said, scrolling through 3 entries labeled External Consulting Support. "But the beneficiary company is a shell. No physical office is listed." She zoomed in on one line. $50,000 paid the same month you were home recuperating from surgery. My stomach twisted. Ruth peered at me over her glasses with concern. "Are you certain you wish to proceed? Most would prefer to let it go." I didn't answer. I merely saved a screenshot to my flash drive. On the drive home, I travelled slowly. Sunlight struck the windshield fiercely. The air carried the scent of early autumn. The radio played an old 60s ballad. The chorus repeated softly. "You only find the truth when you stop pretending." Yes, only when you cease pretending do you begin to see clearly. Back home, I sat before the computer and saved Linda's Facebook photos into a new folder labeled Evidence. I was no longer the woman who buried her emotions behind a stove. I was Maggie Smith, the legal wife of Robert, the mother of Daniel, the one edited out of her own life story, and the woman about to rewrite the ending. The second batch of documents from Ruth arrived as I was wiping the kitchen sink. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting clean stripes across the countertop. I paused, rag in hand, reflecting that this was how my marriage had been maintained. Tidy, silent, until the kitchen no longer felt like mine. The email subject was succinct. 3 suspicious transactions. Key preliminary legal feasibility assessment. I opened it. Familiar PDF statements filled the screen, annotated by Ruth. The company name, Quint Consulting LLC. The account linked to Linda. The transfers, 3 payments totaling over $350,000, carefully staggered over 5 years, each timed just outside the company's official audit cycles. She added a note. This sum lacks sufficient justification. Unless invoices for services of equivalent value can be produced, this is potentially a fraudulent gift. There it was, the proof. A knot of resolve solidified in my chest. I knew what must be done. That afternoon, I contacted an attorney specializing in fraud and corporate law. I have a multitude of questions, I stated, my voice steady and clear. I believe my late husband systematically plundered his company to support his longtime mistress. The lawyer, Michelle Robinson, was in her mid-50s. Her voice on the phone was warm and no nonsense. She listened calmly as I spoke. You must send me everything you possess, she instructed. Every document, every email, every photograph. I hung up and began copying files. When finished, I had over 50 documents. I printed everything, arranged it neatly in a folder, and delivered it to her downtown law office. Her firm occupied a glass skyscraper. I observed the Chicago skyline as I waited. Upon entering, she offered a kind, professional smile. She had a sharp haircut framing her chin and wore an impeccably fitted suit. She accepted the folder, flipped through it, and nodded. We will review this thoroughly, she said. I'll be in touch. Thank you, I said, meeting her gaze. She betrayed me and my son aided her. I want her to repay every last cent. Michelle adjusted her glasses. We will do our utmost. The ensuing months became a whirlwind of appointments, emails, and legal proceedings. We filed a lawsuit against Linda Mallister, and the case generated significant attention. Robert's former firm, his attorney, and even his estate became entangled. Then there was Daniel. He sided with Linda. He was outraged. You're destroying his memory, he accused over the phone. Daniel, your memory of your father is a fairy tale, I replied. He was a con man who used money to betray his wife and his son's mother. That is the truth. He hung up. I waited for him to call back, but he never did. It wounded me, but I persevered. I had to. The case proceeded to court. Linda and her attorney attempted to portray it as a misunderstanding, asserting the funds were legitimate payments for consulting services. They produced fabricated invoices Robert had supplied her. But we possessed Ruth's evidence and Robert's Facebook photos. I took the stand and recounted the events. I spoke of our 40-year marriage, the sacrifices made for him and Daniel, and the agony of discovering the truth. The judge, a black woman in her mid-60s, regarded me with understanding. I believe she comprehended what transpires in the hearts of women like me. Ultimately, the judge ruled in our favor. She ordered Linda to repay everything Robert had given her, plus interest. The total exceeded $1 million. Linda was compelled to sell the properties purchased with the misappropriated funds. She was ruined, financially broke, unemployed, her reputation in tatters. I never saw her again. As for Daniel, he did not speak to me for years. Then, upon my father's passing, he contacted me. We met at the funeral and embraced. We began seeing each other anew. I recounted the entire story and he started to understand. It required years, but we mended our relationship. He apologized, admitting he had been defending an illusion all along. I embraced him and told him I had never ceased believing in him. In that moment, tears glistened in many eyes. Daniel approached and hugged me gently. "Mom," he said, smiling, "when did you become so adept at delivering speeches?" I smiled in return. "I always was, you simply weren't listening." We both laughed. Everyone laughed. Before the gathering concluded, I took a brief stroll in the garden. I halted before the crabapple tree I had planted 20 years prior. "Last year, this tree nearly died," I remarked. "I nearly cut it down, but this spring it bloomed earlier than ever, and it continues to bloom." The women chuckled. I added, "Even it understood that what remains alive should never be given up on." That evening, after everyone departed, I folded the chairs and stored them in the shed. The porch wind chime tinkled softly in the breeze. I turned to watch the sunset, resting above the old maple tree at the street's end, as if posing the question, "Who are you truly?" I removed my heels, walked barefoot into the house, hung up the dress, and retired to bed. I knew who I was. I was a survivor, a fighter, and the truth had set me free.